A lot of people have been exchanging misinformation on the internet. There are memes and there are also genuine questions. If you have an opportunity to get the COVID-19 vaccine and you are pregnant, let's just start with pregnancy. What should you be thinking about right now? What do we know? What do we not know?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the issues with advising people who are pregnant or breastfeeding about the COVID-19 vaccine is that pregnant and breastfeeding individuals were not included in the clinical trials. So we don't have data about, one, the level of efficacy. Is it very efficacious in pregnancy or less efficacious? And then we don't have data about the adverse events, if they're increased, the same, decreased, or anything like that in this population. So what we're really working on is two different things. One, theoretical risks. And so what can we think of in our knowledge of the human body, the placenta, other vaccines in pregnancy, and the risks of COVID itself in pregnancy. So what I discuss with patients is that this is a personal choice that you have to make based on your situation. Those theoretical risks are very low. We know that there are lots of other types of vaccines that are really safe and beneficial in pregnancy, like the flu vaccine and the Tdap vaccine. And the mRNA vaccine, though it's new, is more similar to those than other types of vaccines like live vaccines. Mm-hmm. And we know that the risks of actual COVID disease in pregnancy can be a lot more severe than somebody who's just like you, but isn't pregnant. There's a higher risk of hospitalization and ICU admission and maybe even death. So we contrast those things with the unknown risks/benefits of the vaccine and allow the pregnant person or breastfeeding person to make a decision for themselves. And that's really, really hard to do. Having that conversation is hard to have, and making that decision for yourself during pregnancy is really challenging.
So I understand it's a question that you yourself are navigating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I really always want to validate for other people that it's an individual decision and they can make the best decision for them. For me, this decision is quite easy, and I will be getting the vaccine as soon as I'm able to. I work in the hospital. I see patients all of the time. I am at risk all of the time at work. Even though I don't really do anything and stay in my apartment, my community spread here in St. Louis, Missouri is very high. So for me, it's a no-brainer that I absolutely want to protect myself from the severe illness of COVID. I want my body to start creating antibodies to COVID so that it can be passed along either through the placenta if they're made by that time. I'm at the end of pregnancy, so we'll see. Or certainly, hopefully, with a breastfeeding relationship.
So that's a question, we put this on our Instagram and we got a lot of questions. And one of them was, and these are two sort of interrelated ones that you just touched on. One, if I get COVID, and in this case, if I get vaccinated while I'm pregnant, do the antibodies pass? Do we know, or are we guessing that the antibodies pass through to the fetus? And by the same token, breastfeeding. So some of the recommendations in the UK have been really restrictive with respect to pregnant and breastfeeding people, right? They've said the vaccine should not be given to those individuals. Here in the US, the CDC and the FDA have actually said, as you mentioned, it's up to the pregnant person. So does it make sense to put together, pregnant and breastfeeding people? And kind of in a more positive gloss, can there be something good about the pregnant person or the breastfeeding person getting the vaccine, or do we even know?
Yeah, tons of great questions. I'm going to kind of take that antibody question first, and then I'll sort of address my thoughts on the UK and Canada's different recommendations than the FDA here in the US. So we don't know for sure, because there haven't been tests done in pregnant and breastfeeding people about the degree of immunity that gets passed. But we do know that the placenta is such an amazing organ. It does pass certain types of the long-lasting antibodies that pregnant people's body makes onto fetuses. And those antibodies live for several weeks. So things like the flu vaccine, that's why we recommend all pregnant people get flu vaccine, because their bodies make antibodies. Not only are they protected from severe flu, but they can pass on some immunity. The same with breastfeeding. There is immunity that is passed with breastfeeding. Now, the degree of immunity and the length of the breastfeeding relationship, the age of your child, whether or not they're eating, it's more complex than just like every breastfed child will have better protection, but it is something that's probably going to happen to a degree. And so that's the way in which we kind of cocoon or protect fetuses or babies is by passing the antibody. It's not that the vaccine ingredients themselves pass. We don't know about that, but we don't think they do. It's that the antibodies that basically the pregnant person or breastfeeding person's body does the work and then passes the benefits on is what we are theoretically thinking. And again, this should follow like it does for other similar types of vaccines, but we won't know for sure until we get some studies, which, you know, hopefully will be coming out in the coming months.
Yeah.
Regarding the UK and Canada, I'm always frustrated when pregnant and breastfeeding people are denied autonomy to make a choice that's best for them. I think that's a paternalistic route to go, saying you don't have access. But at the same time, we've seen that in those countries, the amount of community spread is a lot lower than it is in the US. Our pandemic is completely out of control, and they have more policies where their pandemic, although they will have outbreaks and go back into lockdowns, et cetera, the degree of community spread and the likelihood of getting COVID-19 is going to be lower in those countries. And at the same time, they have universal healthcare. So a lot of times their pregnant population may actually be healthier because they have access to healthcare outside of pregnancy, unlike many Americans. I still don't agree. You know, I think autonomy is best, but I think that that in the context of more policy shielding healthcare workers, paid leave after pregnancy, et cetera, perhaps that played into those organizations' decisions that they're better able to protect pregnant and breastfeeding people who they feel like may need the vaccine less. So again, I don't agree, but I think that there's extra context there than just they're not allowed there and here we make a choice. But I'm very glad the FDA said American women can make the choice.
Can you tell me, and I think we have time for just this one last question, why don't we have that information? Why don't we have that research yet about the impact of the vaccine on pregnant people?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. So historically, it's pretty much the rule that when pharmaceutical companies are trialing new therapeutics, whether that be vaccines, prescription medications, other treatments, they exclude pregnant people from trials. And that's something that way before this pandemic, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and then other organizations like breastfeeding medicine, those representing early childhood health and pediatric health, have been advocating to change. And that's because what we're left with is question marks when a medication is approved, and then trying to look back at pregnant people who are offered it and a really complex counseling thing like we're seeing right now. Whereas the other option is that these pharmaceutical companies have trials that are open to pregnant people who are able to volunteer and look at the effects in pregnancy. Before pregnant people would be offered inclusion, there's usually what's called preclinical safety data, or basically usually animal studies or basic science type of studies using pregnancy to assess for any major red flags and proceed, and then kind of give the green light to proceed with human studies. But what we're seeing is that even for medicines not related to pandemic or infectious disease, medicines related to like chronic illness, et cetera, we don't see pregnant people included in trials. And that's really frustrating because it always then leaves them out and leaves them late to get something that could be wildly beneficial for them. Many times we don't find out till years after a medicine is approved that it has a huge benefit for pregnant people because the studies were not done on the front end, and then we have to wait for them to be done on the back end.
Right. And then I think we have about 1 minute left. When do you think we will see some of the data on pregnancy and the vaccine?
I think it'll be soon. I was talking to someone yesterday. I mean, science, we've seen through this pandemic that science can be frustrating slow compared to our on-demand culture. But the reason for that is scientific integrity, keeping quality science at the forefront, and protection of those participating in scientific studies. I know that scientists and doctors have been working on overdrive all year, myself included, trying to get more information done quickly. My hope is that with healthcare workers who might be pregnant or breastfeeding participating in studies, that we might have some data available around the summertime when maybe the general population is offered the vaccine. So that would be my hope. But I think that we'll see more information for years to come also.